I don't understand with him how he spent 25 years campaigning against the EU and still not understanding what it is.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Chatter, a podcast from The Gist. On today's show, we're talking to Jackson Rawlings from the Politicalists. Now, we had a really long and really in-depth conversation about the state of British politics today and about sort of more abstract ways in which we could reform the system and how we could envision a better Britain. Apologies for the police sirens in there a little bit, about halfway through in the middle of London, so there wasn't really much we could do. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Facebook or Twitter. But without further ado, here is Jackson Rawlings. So, Jackson, great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks.
We're on a houseboat in just by King's Cross. Thanks to David, our host, for hosting us. Well, me anyway, and you for the next hour or so.
Yes.
But yeah, I wanted to talk to you about how you would envision changing the political system in Britain and trying to make it maybe more representative of people's views, maybe more effective at governing, whatever you felt was the optimum use of government. So what would you say the biggest problem in UK politics is right now?
I think probably the biggest problem facing politics in the UK is it's a lack of sincerity with how politics is done. And I think that's kind of what's led to Brexit and the kind of issues within the political parties themselves of how they actually do politics. I think that with things like their manifestos and their manifesto pledges, you would expect at least some of these promises to come to fruition in some way, that you would expect that the politicians are aiming towards creating a society that they've envisioned. And actually, as it stands, I don't think anywhere any political party in the UK has undertaken work of that kind whilst in government since perhaps the Blair years in 97. I don't think there's been a sincere political ideology or cause that has been undertaken by a party when they've been in power, which has meant that the public has essentially lost all trust in politics, and that's been the case for nearly 20 years now. The main reason for that is because they believe that these promises that the politicians are making, they don't see them come to fruition, and so they don't believe politicians when they make these promises. I think that we need to find a way to change what it is politicians are about, because we've moved from politicians being administrators and public servants to politicians being snake oil salesmen, being kind of essentially they sell us a product that may or may not actually be what it is, and we either buy into it or not. And the problem is now the majority of people will realise that it's pointless buying into it because it doesn't actually work. Politics doesn't work the way it should do.
So how do we get to this lack of sincerity or real visions for the country? I
mean, I said that the Tony Blair years were possibly the last time that happened, but actually, I'm talking about the first term Blair years. I'm a bit of a sort of centrist dad myself, so I always loved the kind of reform agenda that the early Blair years put in place. I don't think that the latter years, particularly after the Iraq War, I think potentially that was the catalyst, really. But certainly everything beyond the Iraq War, it changed. The government changed how they acted, how they viewed the populace, and with the increase in terrorism and surveillance laws and that kind of thing, it went from the UK government serving the population to the UK government seeing the population as a threat, as an enemy, as something that had to be suppressed to some extent. So I think that from the latter Blair years, and potentially with the expenses scandals and everything that went on in the sort of latter years of the 2000s, 2010, that kind of time, there was never really any full there was no recompense. There was nothing that came from it when it was clear that politicians had done something wrong. When there was a huge controversy about it at the time, and then it never really turned into any. A few politicians, a few MPs got. I think they lost their seats. A couple of them got fined or had to pay back the money that they'd spent. But I mean, it was one of the most insane scandals that's happened in British politics in the last 25 years. And people just went, well, that's politics, and that's how we do it now.
Just a little plug for Jeremy Corbyn here. He had the lowest expenses claims out of any MP last year, I think it was. Yeah, and I believe he's released his expenses claims every year, as opposed to other MPs who have had to be coerced to do so. So whatever you think about Jeremy Corbyn's politics, well played to him for being transparent.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
So we're at a point where there's no sincerity left in politics, that politicians aren't really being held to account for their actions.
Yeah.
We wrote a piece on The Gist about the sort of no responsibility trend that's permeated not just the UK, but I think it's dripping over from the Atlantic from across the Atlantic as well.
Yeah.
And honestly, I feel like it's a little bit of scandal fatigue. And the kind of outrage culture that we've arrived at is, in my mind, partially to blame for that, because we should be like furious about everything.
Yeah.
There's no like, well, that's probably fair enough. Yeah. Or there's like, well, let's pick our battles. There's like just outrage about everything.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I was talking about this with Barney Scholes from Vote Leave earlier today, actually. And we were talking about, I can't even remember how we got onto it. We were talking about Jacob Rees-Mogg and his investment firm moving to Dublin.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
He has no say in that, right? This is a non-issue, right? It's just like it's like an interesting like fact. And this is probably like a pretty good illustration of why like the capital is going to leave Britain because of Brexit. But like, to start like abusing Jacob Rees-Mogg about it's just a waste of your energy.
Plenty of other things that you could abuse him for.
Like abuse him for his sheer hypocrisy of his stance on abortion, or his just like lunacy of free market ideology.
Yeah.
There's so much more that you could argue with him about, rather than like just leave the things that can't be left alone.
And I think that's potentially the as you say, I think that's the issue we're facing now is this kind of this fatigue that we have with because politicians no longer feel like they need to act in the public interest necessarily. They act within their own parameters of how they believe they should further that, how they can further their careers, how they can consolidate power, how they can a lot of the time, and I'm very much making generalizations here, but there are some who are obviously not like this, but there are a lot of people who go into politics now because they know that they can get a decent job out of it at the end. They know they can get a golden handshake when they leave politics. By you only have to look at Blair and Cameron and Osborne and Johnson. The list is endless.
Boris Johnson hasn't even finished. He literally just resigned from the cabinet and took a $250 grand a year job at the Telegraph illegally.
And that's it. And again, that is a scandal in and of itself. And 15, 20 years ago, there would have been a huge thing about that, but because it's just one of many things. After he's come out yesterday with the thing about Muslim women in
the letterbox comment. Yeah, it'd be great if he was a comedian.
I mean, I do.
Like if he wasn't a politician, I think it would be hilarious.
I do wonder if he thinks that he's still on Have I Got News for You, and that's how his career is playing out. Is that he is just the bumbling oaf that makes people laugh on TV. But I mean, it's quite a bizarre situation there. I worry for the integrity of our political systems and of our politicians now, because I think there was a time, probably in the 80s going backwards, when you had people like Tony Benn and other politicians of that ilk who essentially they did it because they believed in something. They did it because they believed that they were providing, they were making the world better, they were making the UK better, and as sort of pie in the sky and idealistic as that might sound, the reality is we need that kind of idealistic belief system in politics. Otherwise, we end up with these kind of this self-serving class who have no real. Do you actually think, if you think in terms of Boris Johnson, do you think Boris Johnson really believes anything that he comes out with? I don't think he does. I think he's the reason he's come out with that thing about Muslim women yesterday was because he met with Steve Bannon last week. He decided that they've orchestrated that it's going to be. It's almost a campaign, a dog whistle campaign. Now he's singling himself out as the person on that side of the political spectrum for whatever happens with Brexit and if the current government falls and whatever else, he's putting himself in position now, along with Jacob Rees-Mogg and Michael Gove, to essentially carve out this niche as the rightist of the right wing. With a slightly respectable
Trump, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Like he's been openly, very, very, very openly sort of supportive of Trump's style of negotiations, of style of politics, of his success in getting to the White House. And I kind of feel like he feels like he can emulate that in a way.
Yeah, I think he does, and I think if you look at I suppose he has, to some extent, he has been a reasonably successful politician in that he was London mayor and he's risen to the ranks of foreign secretary, and he's not. I
think the defining moment of his career so far is the bus.
The
350 million.
For better or for worse, do you mean?
I mean, that's the most consequential thing he's done in his career.
Yeah.
Because that was him, that put him on the map.
Yeah.
It was a genius piece of branding. It was horribly disingenuous. And probably morally wrong.
Yeah.
But genius because it moved the conversation towards it.
And I think this is the thing is that Johnson, to a lesser extent Gove and Rees-Mogg, they are Machiavellian politicians in the extreme. That's all they do is they act. It's literally like using the prince as a playbook. they stab each other in the back. They stab anyone they can possibly jump across to get into a position of power. They do so. So it's no surprise to me that they're the ones currently cozying up to Steve Bannon, who is essentially the kingmaker for Trump. I'm beyond the point of worrying now because it's happening. There's no point worrying and being concerned that this is the direction we're going. It is happening. We are facing what effectively a very right-wing / fascist coup in this country. We right-thinking individuals and need to come together and actually create a plan to fight it because it's happening right now.
Now, something I was talking about with a friend of mine recently, actually, and I'm not going to pretend to be the first person who ever thought of this or even talked about it, but in my mind, when you go beyond like just what's going on in politics day to day and where positions that political parties are at and where we're at, for me, the left and the right, however polarized they are, need each other so much.
Yeah.
Like it's no surprise that whenever you get like a party drifting further right, then the other side will start to drift further left. Like it's a sort of give and take thing in my mind. Is like we'll go through periods of polarization, then people will come back together. So I've been trying to work out how we deal with the fact that we have this level of polarization while still acknowledging that the free exchange of ideas in this way is still really important to the way that we conduct politics as a whole in general.
It's whether or not you tolerate the intolerable, I suppose, to some extent, and whether you're willing to allow into the public discourse a conversation that really ought to remain in the private sphere. In any normal circumstances. We're not really in normal circumstances anymore with what's going on. Does that mean that we should allow, communism a voice? Does it mean that we should allow fascism a voice on the public stage? I think that you go down a very dodgy path as someone somewhere in between those two extremes by saying I want to shut those off completely. I want to no platform them. I don't.
See, I'm I'm quite libertarian on speech. Like, I think people should say what they want. Like, people can say what they want. Like, I'll tell them they're a horrible person for it. But I feel like I was really disappointed with Facebook deplatforming Infowars. Infowars is like mostly just trash.
It's
right?
Conspiracy theory,
weird stuff
and stuff.
But Alex Jones has been right about stuff. And he and the people who follow him, there's a pretty huge proportion of people as well, like way more than you'd realize. Like, will still think and talk in this way. Just to put it away doesn't in fact, like, that often that like represses it.
I mean, they feel like I've actually been doing a bit of research myself into that kind of subset of the social media, alt-right on social media to some extent, and they feel persecuted as it is. They feel like they're the most persecuted section of society, which is, you know, absurd when you actually think about it. But they genuinely believe that, and by no platforming them, by taking away their mouthpiece on social media, all you're doing is selling them that narrative. They can buy into it, and it makes it hard to take the moral high ground when you're effectively doing what you are concerned they are going to eventually do. And that in theory is what we'd be most concerned about with the alt-right, is that it moves into a kind of full fascist ideology where repression and oppression go hand in hand. We aren't allowed to speak our mind. We aren't allowed to do things like this. That would be my concern, is that is the road that the alt-right goes down, or is leading towards. What place do we have to then say, we don't think you should be saying that, when that's exactly what we're concerned about them potentially doing to us at some point? I think it sets a dangerous precedent. And actually, I read something quite interesting recently where someone said that the fact that to some extent it's a case of the state versus the individual, and I'm not really necessarily in total agreement with it, but it's an interesting thought, is the state versus the individual rather than left versus right. And
it's like it's big government versus no government.
To some extent, authoritarianism versus complete freedom. And the concern I think you have is that it's almost like the canary down the mine at the moment with the alt-right, because the state is pushing out this idea that, well, we should potentially no platform, the state and obviously these individual companies as well. But
I feel Facebook's hand has kind of been forced in a way, because they have done some horrible things with personal data, and just been like seriously neglectful of the way they've stored it, the way they've like allowed people to use it.
Billion stock value last week, didn't they? Because of
I think it was like 1.7 billion what wiped off
something like that.
But they are not the only people doing this shit.
No.
And I feel like they get a really bad rap. In that, we've got to realize that that's just like the culture of these big social media platforms where they're like, you are the product. There's no other way to say it. You are the product. They are getting the money that they are getting is for your data. That is it. You're the target of the ads, and that's what they're selling people.
Absolutely.
And I think it would have been much easier for Mark Zuckerberg, right, if when people were in front of when he was in front of Congress or the European Parliament, and people were like, why are you storing so much personal data on people? It'd be like, if he just turned around and went, because I can sell it. It's legal. What are you going to do? Like, change the law and I won't do it.
and I think actually the interesting thing about that is, so, and again, it comes back to Brexit, as everything does. The current GDPR rules that you probably will be well aware of by now, because every time you go onto a bloody website, something pops up and says, do you accept these?
Well, that hasn't really done much. All we've done is accept the new agreement.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think everyone just clicks yes. I'm waiting for someone to create an add on a browser extension to just do a mass yes to everything. That'd be great. But the point being is that
if you're looking like for a browser extension for just a little more privacy, Ghostery is great. They block like trackers on websites for you.
Okay. So I'm a massive hypocrite in that sense, in that I don't like the collection of data necessarily, but I also quite like having personalised news feeds and not being adverts that are a little bit more relevant.
Well, like
to me.
Just just to that point, I'm writing a book about the sort of different influences on the Brexit vote and more specifically the vote leave and leave.eu and grassroots out. And something I started sort of thinking about more generally was, and had listened to things before but never really thought at length about it, was the model with which we which we conduct ourselves in the digital economy. Like when the internet was sort of starting to blow up, we all, whether consciously or subconsciously, made this decision to go, we'll give up our data in exchange for these free services. And like, you can make loads of arguments about the internet wouldn't have grown in the same way if it hadn't been so easy for us to move from platform to platform or website to website and just like give them a few details and that was it. But there's a fantastic example of another way we could have done it, is the Patreon model that a lot of people on YouTube are using now. So they've got something like they're estimating $300 million in money contributed to creators this year, like just this year. So people are clearly willing to pay for quality content and quality things. So I think that it's not impossible to have a world where you have your personalized feed and you have everything you want whilst your data is still protected. It just involves paying in a slightly different way.
Well, and that's it. It's you have to make a compromise on something. Unfortunately, in the world that we live in now, we're not able to just have able to have things all our own way. I think personally, and it's perhaps too radical in this current climate, certainly, but I think that the solution to a lot of it would be to make the internet itself a utility, akin to gas, electric, anything like that, and create some kind of state funded social network. Now, the problem you have there immediately,
then the state is the data collection.
It brings to mind the idea of China and all of this kind of stuff of, but if you had something along the lines of a decentralized internet state model, so almost exactly the same as it is right now, where you have just a network of disparate nodes across the world, the same thing, but rather than those nodes being Facebook and Google and Twitter and Amazon and whatever else, they are East Sussex County Council and your local authority and blah blah blah. There's a lot less likelihood of a misappropriation of data when that data is so localized. I think because the amount of damage that you could do as a town with data compared to the amount of damage you could do as a whole state is there's quite a big significant difference.
The government haven't exactly had a great track record of keeping sort of confidential things confidential.
No, the government
like what was
itself,
it? They left the Brexit papers on the train.
There's always things like that, isn't there? And there was something to do with the budget last year as well, wasn't there? But yeah, I say that when I say it's a radical thing, I'm saying this in the sense that it would be completely impossible to enact with the current government or a government of any kind of potentially a Corbyn supermajority government, if that was to ever happen.
I don't even think that they would be pro-nationalising the internet.
I don't think so either. But I think you need something step towards it. If Corbyn somehow managed to get a huge majority, I think the debate, the public discourse would slightly shift to see ideas that radical as potentially more appealing. So I think the reality is, with the current system we have in place, and I mean in terms of everything that we have in place, the current political system, the electoral system, the House of Lords, the House of Commons, everything that we have, it's impossible to take these huge, big, radical ideas and actually do anything with them in reality, because we don't have the system, the machinations in place to enact such a thing. It's just not possible.
Well, I think now you talked about Blair at the start.
Yeah.
Just to go back before I go on to this point, there's a 30%, or YouGov did a poll on this, 30% are in favour of the telephone and internet providers being nationalised, 17% don't know, and 53% are opposed to it. Yeah. So just for a rough number of who's in favour of it.
Yes, yeah. not quite the same as the railways, which is the opposite to that, I think.
The police are the highest level, that's 87%, the NHS 84%, the armed forces 83%, schools 81%, Royal Mail 65%, railways 60%, water companies 59%, the BBC 58%, and energy 53%. So
interesting.
The least popular thing is the airlines. They're only 14% think they should be nationalised.
I can imagine that would be quite a harrowing experience, actually, nationalised.
Well, my flight was 3 hours late today to get to London.
Well,
so
there is that.
Couldn't be worse, could it?
There is that. Yeah, I think that's the argument for nationalising railways to some extent, isn't it? That they are currently so bad anyway.
Well, I think it's a slightly different argument. Like the airlines are a more international sort of thing than a sort of national railway system. But back to my point, you were talking about Blair and his sort of being the last government that really had a vision and captured the people's imagination with an ideology more than anything. Do you think that is wwhy they were able to get the Lords reform done that they did? Because they really chopped that thing down from well over 1,000 hereditary peers to was 108 hereditary peers to be sort of retired as they retire.
Eventually it was down to 68 or something.
Yeah,
now, isn't it?
And now it's just basically government appointed peers that and crossbenchers and some religious representatives and whatnot.
Yeah.
So, do you think that's why?
I think so. I think the narrative that they had was so strong at that time, and if you think the British society at that point was kind of pre-internet, so everyone kind of had the same media exposure, the same. There was a much more of a national consciousness and conversation than there is now since the internet has taken off. I think that Blair and New Labour itself was such a intelligent reaction to what had come before it, because there are so many times that it looked like in the early 90s and late 80s, it looked like Labour might be able to actually do something. Kinnock and whoever else, it looked like they might do something, but they were just still too seen as too socialist, too left wing. Obviously the getting rid of Clause 4 in the early 90s for the Labour Party was huge, and then but the main thing was this selling this narrative. And if you think if anyone thinks back to that time, and it's the whole things can only get better, and Blair at the conference, dancing and all this kind of stuff, and Britpop, and all of that was going on, and there was a whole culture around that, the politics of that time, that was akin to early Thatcherism. Perhaps the sort of the NHS creating the Attlee government, that kind of stuff in the 50s, where the culture and the ideology of the country just happened to come together with what the politicians were offering. So we were much more susceptible and willing to allow them to do what they saw as morally right, I suppose. That then went too far, with then Blair believing that he was morally right to invade Iraq or whatever your views on that are. But the reality is he had, in that first 3 to 4 years, the mandate to get things done.
My stomping majority helped.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so in a way that was the last big majority that there was. The Tories.
Well, in 2001, they still had a bit of 157 seats.
2001, and then 2005 was a lot less, wasn't it?
Something like 97.
Yeah. But certainly, since for the last 3 or 4 governments, there's not been that political mandate that those governments had. So that's a contributing factor as well. But you almost want to just say you want to supersede that. You don't want to be so reliant necessarily on that the minutiae of the electoral system, but for there to be change in the country, you need to have some checks and balances in place. You need to have something that proportionalizes the views of the country and actually delivers that the views of minorities and that kind of thing. But I think that the current electoral system is to some extent such a shackle on any kind of vision or visionary politics that it requires it would require something like that Blair majority to be able to do anything remotely. What this country kind of needs, because I think we're coming to the point now. It always is cycles to some extent, but I think we're getting to that point again, kind of like towards the end of Thatcherism, where the country just feels like it's almost on its knees, and particularly since the Brexit vote and everything, you see everything's so divided. But we went from the 5th biggest economy to the slowest growing economy in the G7 or in the G20. We have no real industry beyond the Nissan factory in Sunderland or whatever it is.
Well, there's some small.
Yeah, there's a few bits and bobs. We don't have an identity, and this is what the Brexit vote is in part about, was trying to create this, or claw back this identity of colonial Britain setting sail on the seas, and we don't have that identity as a nation anymore because we sold off half of everything to foreign investors and to private enterprise rather than try and forge a way. If you look at, for example, and it's always these like Canada and the Nordic countries, they pick a system and they stick with it throughout all of almost every government that they have. So no matter how far, whether it's a right wing government or a left wing government, there's a thread that runs through these countries that they have an identity that they stick to, and they won't go beyond a certain threshold on either side. If it's going to dramatically alter the way the path that they're on.
I would say we're kind of in a similar position.
I think we were until I think we have been historically. I believe that Thatcherism and then Blair is a slight correction to it.
Wow, the two halves of the same coin, really.
Yeah, absolutely. But certainly,
the first person that Tony Blair went to see once he was elected was Margaret Thatcher.
Yes, yeah, and
I love that fact. I probably quote that in like half my podcast.
And she said her great. I don't know if it's actually a true quote or not, but she said that her greatest success was Tony Blair. So yeah, I think the difference was that we were until Thatcherism we were a social democracy with a big safety net of state funded services across the board, with the NHS and everything else. That was from post-war era until 1975, 79. That was what Britain was, and that was our identity. We were rebuilding ourselves after the war. We'd created this identity, and all the governments in that period, some might have diverged a little bit, but they kind of stuck to that path. Then Thatcherism happened, and then Blairism afterwards, which were both kind of, as you say, two sides of the same coin, neoliberal agenda and privatisation. The biggest. Everyone is an outcry about the privatisation of the NHS under the last two Tory governments, but actually the bulk of it was done under Blair.
Yeah, it's only just sort of started to come to light. They did restructure the management and corporate side of things, and made it a lot more sort of bureaucratized and admin heavy. Yeah. Which probably didn't help. No. And that probably sort of brought out and sort of brought into clearer focus the problems that had been created over the previous sort of 10, 15 years. Yeah. I'd love them. £1 out of every 6 that we send to the taxpayer is spent on a management consultancy firm. Yeah. £1 out of 6. So if you paid £600 in tax last year, 100 quid of that went to a management consultancy firm. Yeah. That just seems like madness. Yeah. But, you kind of touched on something that I wanted to, we were going to get into there, was the sort of what you could do to the UK electoral system to try and improve things. Like, would you have been happy with alternative vote if it had gone through? No. Where would your ideal sort of system lie?
Alternative vote, I think, who was it said? Was it Nick Clegg, I think, actually said it was a miserable little compromise of a system. It was definitely it was definitely a Lib Dem. I think it was Nick Clegg, might have been Vince Cable, someone like that. But it was, and that was the thing. It was when the AV referendum was an absolute joke of a referendum, and actually
Well, Cameron sunk it with about 3 words.
Yeah, and it's kind of ruined that for a generation as well, to some extent, because the idea of electoral reform now is tainted.
You had your go,
yeah, exactly, and it was AV was just it's an absolutely pointless. It's an ever so slight move towards proportional representation, but it's barely to any other country or most other countries in the world, it would be considered closer to a non-proportional system. But to us, it was seen as a move towards proportional representation. I mean, I think I always go on about it because I studied it when I was at school, and I find it kind of, it's a bit of a politics geek favourite, which is the AV Plus system.
Okay. Do you want to explain how that works?
Yeah, just about trying to explain. Roy Jenkins, there was a commission in 1997 when Blair came to power, looking at potential, because obviously, as I say, they had this huge reform agenda. So they looked at possible electoral reform, and what the commission suggested was essentially a modded version of AV Plus that brought it almost towards full proportional representation, but sort of kept some of the weaknesses with the proportional system at bay. So essentially, the AV Plus system was you have what you had with the alternative vote. So you pick your first, second, third choices, that kind of thing. But then you also have a set of party lists, with candidates specified on those lists who are added. So each constituency would end up having 2 members of parliament to some extent, or most constituencies would have 2 members of parliament. One who was based on their local area. So it's kind of similar to
So would you have to double constituency sizes in order to, or double the size of the commons?
Yeah, it'd probably double. I think probably double constituency sizes. Essentially, well, no, because I suppose so. Realistically, you have a lot less. Not every constituency would have an extra MP,
right?
Depending on whether or not depending on the population size of that area, that kind of thing. But I think yeah, you probably would end up making constituencies a little bit larger. But then, if that was then balanced, so you have a proportional electoral system, or almost a proportional electoral system, and then that was balanced with something like a federal system throughout the UK, I think you would find that actually the localisation element of that you could potentially lose out on by having slightly bigger constituencies would be then compensated by having a central or federal government for a whole region, where each of those where those regions would each have, say, I don't know, 100 or 200 members of their own parliament. It sounds complicated when you put it like that, but it's not actually any more complicated than what we've currently got. The reason the reason it's potentially sounds off-putting at first is because it's just different to what we've got. But we have such an archaic electoral system in place. We're the oldest electoral system in the world, I think, or the oldest still running. We need to break out of this idea of Parliament itself is kind of a symbol of it. The actual building is.
Laura Pedcock made this point.
Yeah, it's decrepit. It's falling apart.
Oh, I just walked past earlier. It's getting renovations.
Well, yeah, but it's the renovations are to keep it standing. It's not to make it better. It's just to make sure that it doesn't fall down in the next year. So
it's not ideal, is it?
No, it's not ideal. And I think maybe it was Laura Pedcock who said that the layout of the Commons, the chamber itself, the adversarial nature of it, how it's two benches opposed to each other, in itself is how our politics is enacted. Because I mean, I think the myth or the law around it is the benches are a sword's width apart, because so that they can stab each other in the 1600s or something. So
to be fair, if I was sitting on those benches, I'd be more worried about the knives coming from the back.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah, totally. But yeah, I mean, it is true to some extent. You have to look at the kind of the way our political system, the symbolism of our political system, and to all intents and purposes, we have an adversarial political system not because of it, but it's certainly, they go hand in hand. And I think the solution to that would be to create some sort of rounded chamber outside of London. Put it in Birmingham or Manchester or somewhere. That's, if we're talking about the UK as a whole, somewhere that's a bit more central to the actual geographical point of the UK. Again, symbolic thing that actually will change how politics is done, because at the moment we're so London-centric with our politics. The North, to hell for the North. Like no one in Westminster gives a damn about them unless their constituency is a northern constituency. The combination of all these things on their own, they sound negligible and a bit pie in the sky, but actually having a rounded chamber in Birmingham rather than in London, with an electoral system that is more proportional, with a federalised system so that each area of Britain has its own say on its own areas. All those things and more combining would completely transform how politics is done in this country. People will start seeing that actually politics does do things happen in politics. At the moment it's not done like that.
I think the kind of stagnation of the last 10 years has given us a real apathy towards our system. Yeah. It's interesting. Like, would that make us one of the only countries with our parliament outside of the capital?
No.
No?
No.
Have you got any other examples?
Off the top of my head?
Yeah.
No. But I do know, there's definitely, I think Canadian Parliament is in, I want to say Toronto, but it's probably not. But I think it's the Canadian Parliament. It's not in wherever the capital of Canada is. Don't actually know.
I lived there for a year. I should know this.
Vancouver?
No, because you always think Vancouver.
Yeah.
And hang on, let me Google this, because we're going to sound like idiots if we don't know this.
Oh God, that's really bad.
Ottawa, there you go.
It is
Ottawa.
It is Ottawa. Yeah, okay. I think the parliamentary building is outside, but I've probably made that up in my head as well. But there certainly are. And you can have things. Oh, okay. I've got a great example. I have got a good example. I've got two.
Okay.
Australia and South Africa. So Australia, there's the administrative capital and the official capital. So the official capital is Canberra. The administrative capital, I believe, is Perth or Melbourne.
Okay.
In South Africa, I think there are three: Cape Town, Johannesburg, and Pretoria. I think. One of them is the administrative, one of them is just purely symbolic, and one of them is something else. And that works. That works absolutely fine. It's not. We have it in our head because it's putting the horse before the cart. We've always had government in the capital, so we think that the capital has to have the government. But actually, there's nothing that says that is the case. And from a
It's one of those things that builds up. Like once you've got government here, then we've got Downing Street here, we've got the Home Office here, we've got there's all the embassies are handy to in the central.
But then
London.
so a smaller example that's kind of actually worked. If you look at the BBC moving from London to Manchester a couple of years ago, and I think Channel 4 did as well. That was a concerted effort on their part to move somewhere that was, well, firstly cheaper, but also because they...
Well, there's the free market solving our problem for us.
Absolutely, but it's in they saw that as a way to become more part of British society outside of London. It's absolutely doable, and as I say, from a purely symbolic perspective, it changes a lot. I think that at the moment, geographically speaking, and from a mentality, there is this kind of view that London is this metropolitan elite that is completely separate, and that in itself was another factor in the Brexit vote. It's the idea that London hasn't got the rest of the country's best interests at heart. Now,
well, it's hard for London to have the rest of the country's best interests at heart when economically London just doesn't seem to suffer. Like, I think this month was the first time in like 15 years that house prices in London dropped. Like through the recession, the 2008, like the credit crunch, like the big one that we like is like the once in a generation, like monstrous crash that we're probably going to see again in 5 years' time. But that like house prices in London just keep went up and up and up, and just didn't seem to even like it. Just sort of like looked at it and went, well, that's nice, and then just.
And I think London is. I don't know the exact figure, but it's but in terms of the actual GDP provides for the UK, it's a huge amount. More than every other big city combined.
Part of that is because the financial services are here, and that's like they're dealing with outrageous amounts of money.
And so what will happen with that after Brexit, I don't know, because the passporting issue for the financial services industry seems to be the big one. That if we had a no-deal Brexit, that's completely screwed. So we lose, I think, 80% of our GDP comes from that.
Well, maybe we can house all our homeless people in the derelict office buildings.
Well, yeah, that is one solution, I suppose. Yeah.
But the free market solving our problems again, man.
Exactly. There's always a solution when you think hard enough. Yeah. No, I think in terms of the mentality of those outside of London, and I say this as someone who lives slightly outside of London but works in London, and I still live in the southeast, so it doesn't really count. But the as far as I can tell, the mentality of those outside of London is that it's this bubble, this metropolitan bubble, who it's like completely separate from the rest of the country. And actually, it's in small things like, you know, when you go to I'm still shocked sometimes if I go to like Nottingham or Leeds or whatever, and I go to a pub and have a pint, and it's like £2.80 or something. And I'm like, oh wow, I was ready to...
If you have enough pints, your train fare can be covered by the saving that you're going to make.
Well, that's actually... I've never thought about that. Yeah, that's quite an interesting way of looking at it. Yeah, I'm going to have to start drinking more, I suppose, when I go to these places.
Well, after Brexit, we're all going to have to find something to do.
Well, that's the other thing, isn't it? Is that we potentially won't have any beer after Brexit. So that's yet another good bonus from that. But anyway,
but the UK makes loads of gin now, so we're going to be fine. We just have to drink gin.
Yeah, and we do make warm ales and things like that. I suppose there's Camden, but it's the I
don't think Camden can supply the whole country's beer.
Whatever. Yeah, probably not. But I think it's I watched a fantastic video the other day with these. It was called Three Guys in a Pub. I don't know if you've seen it. They were just talking about the ramifications of a no-deal Brexit. What would happen on the actual day of leaving if we had a no deal. Okay. And it's horrifying.
If you send it to me, we'll link it in the description.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I mean, I it just made me wince the whole way through. But what was interesting was that something they were discussing there was the supply chain aspect of how things are done in this country. Now, it's not a case of we brew Camden pale ale in Camden, so therefore we can just carry on. It's the amount of different things that go into that specific product that we won't have any access to because lorries that bring that stuff over will be stuck in the ports in Holland and France. There's so many of those things that we think, well, with British industry we can just keep
calm and carry on.
Yeah, and actually no, it's British industry in the sense that it's put together here, but so much, if not all of that industry, apart from the little cottage industries of mom and pop type things, is most of it relies on some kind of supply chain that originates elsewhere. In a no-deal Brexit scenario, that's absolutely screwed. But anyway, yeah, that video is fascinating. Watch it. One of the guys is a import-export exporter, and the other one does something with supply chains and that kind of thing. So it's quite
the whole supply chain thing's fascinating.
Yeah, to a certain type of person.
Well, no, I just mean the fact that they've everyone imagines that we have all of these parts sitting in a big warehouse, and then someone goes, "Oh, I need this part for this," and calls them up, and then they go and they find this part on the shelf. Whereas everything is literally just ordered and used. Ordered, no one has any storage anymore.
Yeah. And that's what they say in this video is as needed delivery. There's no warehouses to store all of the stuff, and actually this is what's going on with this whole stockpiling of food and medicine and stuff. There isn't anywhere to store it. The supermarkets are coming out and saying, "Where do you want us to store this food?" That you're supposedly saying, we haven't got anywhere to store.
I think someone called the supermarkets. They said they weren't stockpiling anything.
No,
it's the government, and then people started rumoring that the supermarkets were doing it. I don't know exactly what.
No, I mean it's absolutely insane, isn't it? When you actually think about it, we're a country in peacetime is shooting itself in the face.
We were relatively prosperous.
Well, fifth largest economy in the G20.
The income inequality we have in Britain is a problem.
Well, absolutely, and don't get me wrong, and I think, and this is why I think there's this Lexit argument as well. The EU wasn't helping essentially the EU is a neoliberal organisation. It's not.
I don't see the EU as this big nanny state that everyone seems to. For me, it's more of a check on the worst excesses of capitalism. It's not there to protect people at the bottom. It's there to stop the very top taking advantage.
I guess the problem with that argument is if you look at what happened with Greece and Italy to some extent, there's a real potential for it to turn into a kind of hegemonic buggery where Germany and France and whoever else. And so in that sense, I understand and potentially sympathise to some extent with the Brexiters and Lexiters argument on that, but I just completely disagree with the conclusion, which is to just get rid of, just jump out of it.
Yeah, like I don't think anyone's arguing that the EU is perfect.
No. I know. Well, I don't know. Yeah, maybe the other person.
Okay, no reasonable person is arguing that. No reasonable person is arguing that anything is perfect.
No, and
aside, of course, from my hammock for this evening.
Very nice.
Yes, it looks very comfy. No, we haven't really touched on this. Aside from, there's a few points I was going to bring it up, but I wanted to talk about. We've sort of discussed how we would change the electoral system, like considered federalism. Talked about different ways in which the EU regulates things and the sort of polarisation in politics. If you had a blank slate and they were going, right, build your country, would you include the internet?
Would I include the internet?
Would you it's a legitimate question.
That is an interesting one. I would include the internet in a much more rudimentary form than it is now, which I know sounds a bit weird, like kind of harking back to something else. But
back in the good old days of the net.
Yeah, I mean, the original intention from Tim Berners-Lee.
Before I could order something at 9 o'clock at night and have it the next day.
Yeah, and ultimately that is, but what you touched on there is exactly the point, is because the internet developed and grew up in such a hyper-capitalist world economy, the internet now reflects that. That's what the internet is for. It's not for anything beyond fulfilling our every want and desire within 5 seconds, as long as you've got the money. That's what the internet is now. When it was first envisaged and created, it was supposed to be a tool of communication, of knowledge and learning and liberation. It wasn't. It was intended to be something completely separate from the world economy, and it obviously it's kind of gone wrong. So would I have the internet? Yes, but I would get rid of Facebook. I would get rid of Twitter, and I'm again a hypocrite because I'm on all of these things. But I would genuinely get rid of those things as long as there was something else that could replace them in a form. So the benefits of those systems, which are communication. So
what you're saying is that you like some factors of social media, but you think that some of it is like toxic, and some of it's a little bit maybe they sort of take their power a little far, and then therefore you think we should just get rid of it. Much like the European Union.
yeah, you've backed me into a corner. I don't think that. I think so. An interesting example. Yesterday, the day before, I posted something on my Twitter account, on the one for Politicalists, and
let's get a plug in for that. I don't think we mentioned them.
Politicalists,
follow Medium, Twitter. We'll link everything below.
Thanks. So I posted an article that I'd written, and it was about my reaction to the government's response to the petition that they'd received, asking them to rescind Article 50 because of the cheating of Vote Leave campaign. Now, obviously, that was a real, long shot. I don't think anyone expected that to actually result in the government going, sorry.
Theresa May wasn't going to get it over her desk and go, oh, well,
that's it.
Guess the game's up, guys.
But anyway, what annoyed me was the response. I thought was very, very dismissive and puerile, and
it's probably because quite a number of leading Vote Leave campaigners are leading members of the cabinet.
Well, there is that, or were.
Well, Gove is still there.
Yes,
Liam Fox is still there.
I can't believe. Anyway, that's a separate thing. And so I put this article out, and somebody jumped on it and was quite dismissive straight away, saying something along the lines of, "Why would you not expect them to fulfil their promises? Like what, blah blah blah." And that's because I'd said something along the lines of, "Why are they taking? Why is it this promise specifically that they're so intent on fulfilling, as opposed to every other promise that they've broken in,
capping energy prices.
Capping energy fees.
I think there's been 6 rises since they made since 2015.
VAT rise. There was NHS funding. There's so many. The amount of manifesto promises from this one and the previous one.
Greenest government ever.
It's all completely just as soon as it becomes politically unsalient for them to do so, they just spin it off and they just ignore that promise. Why this one in particular is so important. Anyway, that was my kind of view on it. This person got really irate about that particular point, and normally if someone responds to me in that way, normally I either completely ignore them or I get irate, depending on whether or not I've had a coffee. I think sometimes I respond in kind, sometimes I just ignore them. This time I tried a completely different tactic, which was to respond almost emotionlessly and with as much facts and kindness as I could possibly muster. You know, it's like a quote of whether you shouldn't ascribe to malice what can be best explained by ignorance.
I think Ben Shapiro uses that quote to describe Donald Trump, but stupidity it's don't attribute malice where stupidity would explain things.
Yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily the case with Trump, but anyway.
I think it's the case in a lot of things. I think he's just an idiot.
I think he's an idiot. I think the people around him aren't idiots, and I think that he's
obviously very talented at selling himself.
Oh, yeah,
that's his thing.
Yeah. Anyway, I was chatting to this guy, and I was responding, and I don't know if I was necessarily changing his mind because he was an ardent leaver, but I noticed the more I spoke to him, the more cordial he responded back to me, and more reasoned and reasonable he was in his posts and his arguments. And I just found it quite interesting as a microcosm of how people could react. And I'm not saying follow my lead here, you know, holier than thou type thing, but there is an argument to suggest that actually the internet and social media are just as bad as the people that are using them. That's all it is. It's not a case that these things in themselves are innately flawed, and even in the sense that they've been formed or through this lens of capitalism, that there are ways you could have compassionate capitalism or, you know, social capitalism, systems that work within that don't necessarily foster the worst aspects of human psyche. And I think that's the big issue, is that at the moment we have these networks in place that essentially just magnify all the worst bits of us to the world, and no one gets to actually discuss the real things. It's not like having a conversation face to face like this, where you can react to everything that's going on around you and the way that person reacts to you and everything. It's so siloed, so blocked off in terms of how you interact with people that you can't help but just exaggerate the various aspects of your personality. So I think the question was, would I get rid of social media?
Yes.
No, I wouldn't get rid of social media, but I would completely revamp how it was used. I think that you'd have to essentially.
Would you go along the Germany have put in very strict sort of anti-fake news laws on Facebook and on all social media?
I mean, I guess the problem with that is what constitutes fake news. Some people would say that BBC or CNN or whatever.
Sometimes they are.
Well, absolutely, yeah. And
the BBC are outstanding on some things, like really outstanding.
Yeah.
Like just worth every penny that anyone ever pays to them.
Yeah.
Like they do incredible work on things like. Panorama is amazing.
Yeah. Like
even just Louis Theroux. Like I would pay the license fee yearly for a new Louis Theroux program every 6 months.
Yeah.
But I don't know how you give people that platform for speech and spreading things without the inherent sort of, some people are going to present facts that are like a little bit sort of.
So something I think I read it recently, which was saying what we need to do is bring back the reverence that we once had for wisdom, expertise, knowledge that we've lost, whether that's a result of politics or culture or over the last 20, 30, 40 years. But
do you think it's something that's more salient on the right or the left?
I think both sides are guilty of sort of facilitating this real superficial. Again, it comes back to this sincerity, I suppose, the lack of sincerity, because both sides are now full of just management consultants, brand image consultants who are trying to put something out there, and the lack of depth of knowledge about politics and the specific issues that we face as a country, the lack of depth from the political parties and the public is effectively what's led us to this point now. Is where we have this system that is fractured and shallow and not working because you don't have the reverence in place for the experts, the people that actually have spent their entire lives studying. This bloody thing the other day with the Conservative MP who just said about Mark Carney's forecast. Oh well, just go back to Canada or something like that. It's like, well, this is a man that's worked for 20 odd years.
They got it wrong in the Euro. Just to
don't know. I'm not
to his point, but I think that sort of dismissal is a bit.
No. So there's a difference between a reverence and a respect for experts and for that knowledge and an unquestioning attitude towards it. Okay? They will still get it wrong, but the theory is that they'll get it wrong less often than those who don't know anything about it. We need to keep a healthy dose of skepticism in society. We need to have people question things, but it's gone from where we used to have people who were. Well, I do sound like I'm being nostalgic here, don't I? But we used to have people who we respected their expertise and their knowledge because of what they'd done. We respected them for how they'd done, how they'd worked and lived their lives.
Do you think that respect's kind of disappeared because of the sort of, like, people can get positions in think tanks or like it's ex-politicians and it's who you know and you sort of get a point, like it's. Do you think that lack of a meritocracy and that sort of like chattering classes, sort of revolving door in between, like a lot of sort of high up like institutions and parts of government is kind of like driven like that apathy towards people, and to the point where they're like, well, why should we believe you? You're not really an expert.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. And I think that's the. I guess that would be the main reason for that. But what I'd be concerned about would be going the opposite way and having a kind of full technocratic government in place. I think that's what happened with Italy in about 2010, 2015. There was this kind of, it was just all they none of them were politicians. They were all like experts, economists and scientists and things. I don't think we necessarily need to go that far.
I'm not advocating China's model, by the way, but like their entire, like most of their council have science PhDs.
Well, yeah. There's
and as much as I don't agree with like the rest of most of what they're doing, their council know what they're fucking talking about.
I'm sure. But I do think there's definitely a place for us putting more emphasis and more respect on those who have worked and have that knowledge and that expertise that just don't have politicians who are actually experts in the thing that they're supposed to be doing. You know, David Davis was Minister for Brexit. And
he got that job because he was a Brexiteer.
Well, absolutely, yeah. But that in itself is, that's what's so ridiculous about it. And I don't understand with him how he spent 25 years kind of campaigning against the EU and still not understanding what it is. But of all the appointments, I mean, so they're all quite grailing as well. It's absurd how he manages to still get jobs. But he
fucks up every department he goes to, resigns, and then gets reappointed 6 months later.
Massive crisis in every single area that he's been in charge of. It's absolutely bizarre. But anyway, he's definitely got something on Theresa May. I think what I think is we really lack is those politicians who dedicate themselves to a cause or a section of public life, become as knowledgeable about it as they possibly can, and endeavour to fix that part of society. Instead, it's just this superficial, shallow level of management consultants on the whole board who have no knowledge of anything deep within those sections. So you can have. I guess
the argument would be that that's what advisors are for, and these people are there to make the decisions based on the information that's given to them, rather than have a vision for themselves.
Well, then let's get rid of them. If that's genuinely though, I mean, if the advisors are the ones that are making those calls, or the ones that are feeding in most of the information, what's the point? Just have a public face on it. I don't understand why you would have politicians who aren't actually competent at what they do.
Well, Northern Ireland essentially has that right now. We have the civil service running the country and no government.
Yeah.
That's not a better option, trust me.
You do end up into a bit of a kind of Kafkaesque nightmare, I think, where it's just pure bureaucracy. But Again, that's what I'm
saying. Not even that, they just can't do anything new. They can continue things running as they are, but they can't do anything new.
Yeah, right, okay. And I mean, I guess that's what I'm saying is instead, if you're going to have politicians, then have politicians who have got a purpose and an ideology and a cause that they're fighting for, and knowledge and expertise of that cause and everything. I want people who representing me who are so unbelievably passionate about a specific thing that they're running for, that's their whole life. That's what they're known for. And I find it really disappointing the quality of politicians that we have now. And that, again, it makes me just sound like an old man, I think. But I do feel like the quality of politicians is severely. Also, not necessarily the quality of politicians, but the quality of politicians in a position of power. Because if you look at the cabinet and the shadow cabinet to some extent, they're not necessarily the strongest people within the party. It's like the strongest people within the party seem to almost be gravitating towards the back benches at the moment, or dropping out of the party completely and doing other things. It's not to be a centrist dad about it, but David Miliband, in theory, was very good. I mean, he didn't really have any views on anything. I suppose that's the main issue. But in terms of how he did politics, he was very good at politics. That was maybe the thing he was good at.
That's probably the problem.
That's probably the problem. Yeah, but he's just dropped out completely. I don't know. It concerns me that there's no one who you feel. I guess the other side of the coin is that you end up with someone almost despot. Nigel Farage type.
Farage gets a bad rap. I think.
Okay. Or could disagree here. Go on.
Right. A lot of the things he says are inflammatory.
Yeah.
Or without doubt. A lot of the things, well, not a lot. Some of the things he says are wrong.
Yeah.
Right. Like Turkey and the EU referendum.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's very little that he says that's aside from the Turkey comments and the sort of expansion of the EU powers. Right. You go back to looking at everything else he said in his campaign, like pre sort of the Brexit campaign really kicked off. There was very little that you could just say, well, that's just wrong. And I think it's a case of, I really love the phrase, facts don't care about your feelings. I don't agree with Nigel Farage's solutions for nearly anything.
Yeah.
But what you can't say is that he's not passionate about what he's talking about. That might be slightly superficial in that he went to 1 out of 42 fishery committee meetings. But what he's talking about... this is kind of to my point that the left needs the right. The left completely and 100% needs people like Farage.
Yeah.
Maybe to be slightly more honest about things, and maybe less sort of fear mongering and sort of dragging up that just that fear mongering sentiment that I don't really like from a lot of the right. But at the same time, if he wasn't there, like arguably the strongest people, if the right wasn't there, the extreme right, especially at the moment, arguably the strongest people in the country would be the hard left people in Momentum. I'm a huge fan of Momentum. I think they're a great organisation. I think they're doing fantastic work for democracy. But I don't agree with some of their sort of more, I don't know, SJW, if you want to use causes. Like, I think that there's a lot of sort of discussion and research to be had, and a lot of their sort of assertions are maybe wrong, but they're getting people energized and they're getting people enthusiastic about politics, and they're fantastic for it. Yeah. And Farage, in his own fucked up way, is doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And without both sides of that, you can't get like a good dialogue. Like, America's actually haven't seen this resurgence of like right wing intellectualism, where people like Ben Shapiro, who again I don't agree with his like remedies for nearly anything, but I think he's a fantastic speaker and a brilliant, like, well reasoned guy. Yeah. And obviously Jordan Peterson. I wouldn't even call him right wing. He's just I would say he's like a centrist dad.
Well,
maybe slightly right, but he doesn't seem like he's morally opposed to people who are ill having welfare or
it's a difficult one. I do to some extent agree. I think pre-referendum, and I mean pre-referendum, Nigel Farage was like kind of like he provided a function in society and in political society, right? Because He was an outlet for those who felt aggrieved. He looked like a regular bloke. He was drinking beer and smoking fags and blah blah blah. You know, there was a position for that kind of politician. It almost looked sincere,
because he gives that, like, you were talking about British identity being missing. Yeah. He gives like an option for that. He's like an offering of what like a stereotype of Britain could be. I don't think he's a good option.
No.
But he gives that.
It's something to grab hold of, certainly. But I think the problem is now, and it's very difficult to distinguish between the two Nigel Farages, because everything that he has done for during the referendum campaign and after is, in my view, I think actually quite a lot of it was despicable. I think
leaving was the worst one. Retiring. It's like you achieve victory and you're in the pole position to go, right, okay, how are we going to do this? We finally got independent Britain, you know, we're going to be... I think I saw Al Murray do his pub landlord thing like 3 weeks after Brexit, and he was like, it's the third free Friday for Britain. And like... And like that's the vision he had. Right, fine. That's your thing. You managed to convince enough people to vote for it. Right. Show us your fucking balls. Let's see what you're like. And he just ran away. Cameron was the exact same. He said, "I will stay," and he fucked off. Cameron.
I think is less. Cameron's just a nothing, is he? He's just nothing. He's not. He doesn't stand for anything. Didn't believe in anything. He just was. He was just. It was pure spin. Superficial management. I
believe he was stronger, more prosperous, better off inside the European Union. Just repeated for 6 months.
It's just nothing. Just point. Farage. So the other thing that Farage, allegedly,
because I know you've written quite a lot about your concerns about fascism in Britain.
Yeah, I mean, and my concern with Farage is that during the referendum campaign and since, he has gone from right-wing grumpy uncle to starting to flirt with fascism now. And if he isn't himself, he's enabling the people who are very much on that side of things to have more of a voice. So he has Steve Bannon on his radio show, Raheem Kassan from
Bannon's a scary guy.
Bannon is one of the most terrifying people in politics at the moment, because he's horrendously. He's a white supremacist. That is actually what he is. He is a Nazi, but he's also quite intelligent.
He's incredibly intelligent.
Yeah, for as far as that goes, he is very intelligent.
If you've heard Christopher Wiley talking about him, he's got not but respect for the guy's intellect.
Yeah, and
like his motives are completely aside from that.
Absolutely. And so that's the worrying thing is how smart and savvy he is with that wheelhouse that he's currently got, and so I guess the thing that I take umbrage with Farage at the moment, and from, as I say, from the referendum onwards, is he's ironically opened the floodgates. He's opened the floodgates to this dialogue and this conversation that was never there before. No one, if Farage hadn't have existed in the UK in the political sphere, we would not have everything that's now coming with Rees-Mogg and with Steve Bannon coming into British politics and targeting and Tommy Robinson and all of that nonsense as well. You know,
Tommy Robinson gets a bad rap as well. He's an idiot, and he's clearly broken the law, and he's clearly said some questionable things, but his fans are way worse, and I wish people would stop equating him with his fans.
He has been in prison like multiple times.
No, he shouldn't have done that. Yeah. But like, he's not this. He's not Satan embodied.
No.
Like, and that's what I take. Like, No. You see people being like, his tongue should be cut out and his legs cut off so he can never spoil anyone else's day. No. It's like, but just, he's done his prison time. Let him.
So with most, I'd say most politicians, most political figures like Tommy Robinson, Nigel Farage, people like that.
I'm not endorsing Tommy Robinson, by the way. I think his ideas are horrible, and he's stirred up some horrendous sentiment amongst some really extreme people, and I do not think those should be put into play. I'm not endorsing them at all.
You see that thing as well? He said he was put in solitary confinement in prison opposite a mosque, a prison mosque. For a start, there was no prison mosque.
You see, this is the sort of shit that's ridiculous.
Yeah, and we don't have solitary confinement in British prisons unless you're in maximum security for murderers and rapists. You have solitary confinement, but in normal prisons, which is what he was in, that doesn't exist. And he went on Fox News and was going on waxing lyrical about the fact that he was being abused by the legal system. Anyway,
I feel like he's probably cracked a bit.
I think he
went through it. So at the start, I think he was like completely sane, but a little bit racist, or quite racist, depending on how you want to do. And then he seemed to have this moment where he went, "Hang on, maybe I shouldn't be quite as racist."
A bit of a conversion.
Yeah, and then he seemed like he was all about talking to people and like trying to like create a dialogue and stuff.
Oxford Union speech, which was like, I mean, wrong, but much more reasoned than previous things he'd done.
And then he ended up in prison and things just went down.
Beat someone up at a horse race.
Yeah. Like, and that must have been the point. He was maybe like, I don't know, getting a lot of sort of pushback when he was trying to be reasonable, and that maybe pushed him over the edge a little bit. But
reminds me a bit of Joey Barton, actually. Same sort of. I don't know. They probably are a bit smart, but they maybe think they're smarter than they are.
Yeah.
But they're also quite thuggish, really.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think what we used to have in place was this. What was effective against figures like Tommy Robinson, Nigel Farage, Rees-Mogg was humour. Good old fashioned British humour was ideal against. We took the piss out of them and made their ideas look stupid and made them look stupid, and that was how we dealt with things. Was we go, no, that is absolute bollocks. What you're saying is ridiculous. You are ridiculous, and we had that. That was our final fail-safe against the dodgy things coming through. Was that level of, and it's like, and potentially because of social media and fear of causing offence and all of that side of things, is we've lost our sense of humour to some extent in this country. We're now much more afraid to take on those figures on both sides.
You're so right. So I was at Latitude about 2 months ago, the festival.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of comedy there. They've always got really fantastic lineup of comedians. And it's great because you can go watch some music, and then if you get a bit tired, it's a bit hot or wherever you fancy sit down, you just go sit in the comedy time and watch some comedy.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
And I was so disappointed by so many people this year because every one of them, "Oh, isn't Trump bad? That's hilarious. Ha ha ha. Oh, he's a dick. Yeah, right. Well, tell us something we don't fucking know.
Yeah.
Or the Brexit thing, like it was like, "Oh, well, I don't care how you voted, but everyone can agree they're doing shit." And that's as far as it went. There was no one there was a couple of people who made like entertaining points, like Marcus Brigstock came out dressed as Satan for the whole 45-minute set and like talked about how he was working his ways in the world. I thought that was a really funny way of talking about it.
Interesting way of doing it. Yeah.
But everyone else bored the tits off me.
And I think, I'm a massive comedy fan, and I think some of the best comedians working at the moment just actually avoid the subject almost entirely. There's a kind of the Mock the Week crew who is to some Mock the Week and High Violent News View and all of that sort of stuff, which it's almost there now at the point where it's almost damaging that those programs are the way they are, because it's that tiny little release valve people, and they go, "Oh yeah,
that's funny,
Trump is a tit," and then that's it, and that leaves, and that makes them just forget about that righteous anger that we should have against Trump and against and the alternative comedians of the 80s, again to sound like an old man, the alternative comedians of the 80s, Alexi Sale and people like that.
Maybe we just call this podcast Back in the Day. Call this episode.
When I was younger.
We'll start with the intro music. Those were the days.
But yeah, they were funny because they were angry, they were shouting, and they were railing against the system.
Jonathan Pye does that, but not particularly humorously.
Jonathan. Yes.
I enjoy his act for one video, and then I get
That's
bored.
the problem. Is it's a one-off thing. It's interesting. It loses it a lot.
As soon as you get halfway through the second one, you're like, "Well, I'm bored."
Yeah, it's kind of one punchline. But I just think there was these. whether it actually did any good, I don't know. But at least there was an outlet, and the same with punk music and alternative culture was so strong back then. Now everyone has these silos of what they're interested in because of the internet and social media. So there's no room for this, no room for subcultures to develop in the way that there used to be. You used to have to go down to your local music place and to get some kind of social interaction and political being, you had to actually physically go somewhere, interact with people, do things. And now it's like you click a button and that's you done. And again, I just sound like a Luddite here, don't I? But it really worries me that there's no longer that sense of community on a grand scale and on a small scale around things like punk and other subcultures, alternative cultures that were ways to fight back against the excesses of the mainstream system.
Well, hipsterism has gone mainstream now.
Well, yeah.
Anyway, we've run on quite a long time. I could sit here and talk all day.
Okay.
I'm just a talker.
It's been great.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks for doing this. Is there any predictions for the next 6 months you'd like to make?
I'm going really bold, right? And I said this earlier on Twitter. I'm going for the momentum convincing the Labour leadership to back a second referendum.
Okay.
Theresa May's government to fall apart.
Right.
General election called in November. Labour to win the general election.
So after the talks are meant to be done.
After the talks are meant to be done, Labour should win the general election on the second people's vote, whether or not so the deal will be. By then we'll know exactly what deal we have in place. So the vote will be yes, no, and then fingers crossed, everyone comes to their senses and we stay in the European Union.
That's quite that well. That would win me some money.
I might put a bet on it, actually. Yeah.
But yeah, thanks very much, Jackson. It's been a pleasure.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. We've got a whole load of amazing interviews coming up that we recorded in London a few weeks ago. Jackson Rawlings and our last episode, Barney Scholes, are just the start of that. Make sure you subscribe if you don't want to miss anything. Until next time, thanks for listening.